There was a time when Turkey was held up as a model for the world, a nation straddling east and west, proud NATO member, an economic powerhouse on the rise. By 2010, Turkey's economy was worth more than $800 billion, placing it among the largest in the world. Cities buzzed with new construction, factories expanded, and the middle class dared to dream of a prosperous future. But that dream did not last. Today, Turkey's currency has lost more than 95% of its value. Inflation has shredded savings, businesses are fleeing, and millions of ordinary Turks now struggle to survive in a country that was once seen as a rising star. This is not the story of war or natural disaster. It is the story of choices, the story of how one man's rejection of orthodox economics turned a miracle into a meltdown. Pre-crisis Turkey, the success story before the fall. At the dawn of the 21st century, Turkey was hailed as one of the world's great economic success stories. After decades of instability, reforms in the early 2000s stabilized the economy, strengthened banks, and attracted record levels of foreign investment. By 2010, Turkey's GDP had soared past $800 billion. It was the world's 17th largest economy, outpacing countries like Saudi Arabia and Switzerland. Inflation, once crippling, had been tamed. Millions were lifted out of poverty. Istanbul became a hub of global finance and trade. Turkish airlines expanded to every corner of the globe. New highways, bridges, and airports transformed infrastructure. Foreign capital poured into real estate, tourism, and manufacturing. For many, this was the Turkish miracle. The middle class flourished, consumer credit expanded, and families enjoyed a standard of living their parents could only dream of. But beneath the prosperity, the seeds of crisis were already being planted, because much of Turkey's boom was built not on innovation or productivity, but on cheap foreign money and easy credit. Borrowed dollars funded construction, consumption, and growth. And while the world celebrated Turkey as a model emerging market, its fate was increasingly tied to one man, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Erdogan's economic philosophy. Interest rates are the mother of all evil. At the heart of Turkey's economic collapse lies one man's belief. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who rose to power in 2003, transformed Turkey not only politically, but economically. His vision was simple, yet radical. He believed high interest rates were the root of all evil. While most economists argue that raising interest rates helps to control inflation, Erdogan insisted the opposite, that lowering rates would make goods cheaper, businesses stronger, and the people wealthier. In his words, interest is the mother and father of all evil. This philosophy became state policy. Independent central bankers who disagreed were dismissed. Over the years, Erdogan fired 3 central bank governors in less than 5 years, each replaced with loyalists willing to cut rates, even as inflation spiraled higher. To him, controlling monetary policy was not just about economics. It was about politics. Cheap loans fueled construction booms, real estate bubbles, and consumer spending that kept voters happy. Shiny new projects, bridges, airports, housing blocks became symbols of progress. But beneath the surface, the costs were mounting. As investors lost confidence in Turkey's institutions, foreign money began to flee. The lira wobbled. Inflation crept higher. Yet each time, Erdogan doubled down, insisting that his unorthodox path was the right one. What followed was not stability, but the slow-motion unraveling of an entire economy. The collapse timeline, from 2018 to 2024. By 2018, the cracks in Turkey's economy could no longer be hidden. Investors were fleeing, foreign reserves were thinning, and the lira began to nosedive. In a single year, the currency lost 30% of its value against the dollar, triggering panic across global markets. Ordinary Turks watched their savings evaporate. Imported goods, from medicine to electronics, doubled in price almost overnight. Families who once lived comfortably found themselves rationing food and fuel. In 2021, Erdogan's obsession with cheap credit reached a breaking point. While inflation surged past 20%, he ordered the central bank to slash rates even further. This defiance of economic logic sent the lira into freefall, losing nearly half its value in just a few months. By 2022, inflation was officially recorded at 85%, the highest in a quarter century. But many Turks knew the truth. Real inflation on everyday goods was far worse. Basic staples like bread, milk, and cooking oil became luxuries. A silent exodus began, not just of foreign investors, but of Turkey's brightest minds, who fled abroad in search of stability. In 2023, as Erdogan secured another presidential term, the lira crisis became chronic. The government scrambled for solutions, including desperate currency swaps with allies like Qatar and Russia. Yet these were only temporary bandages on a bleeding economy. By 2024, Turkey stood transformed. Once hailed as an emerging market miracle, it had become become a cautionary tale. The dream of prosperity was replaced by daily struggle, inflation, shortages, and a currency that had become nearly worthless outside its borders. This was no natural disaster. It was the direct result of one leader's defiance of economic reality. How ordinary Turks are surviving the crisis. For ordinary Turks, survival has become a daily negotiation. Inflation has hollowed out the middle class, forcing millions to adapt in ways unthinkable just a decade ago. In Istanbul, once a symbol of wealth and modernity, families now line up at government-subsidized bread kiosks, clutching ration cards. The price of a single loaf has doubled and tripled in just a few years, and for many, it's the only affordable option left. Households are cutting corners wherever possible, selling cars, jewelry, and even apartments to cover basic needs. Some barter goods instead of using cash, while others depend on remittances from relatives abroad to survive the month. The younger generation, once proud of Turkey's growing status, now speaks openly about leaving. University graduates, unable to find stable jobs or fair wages, take on gig work or flee overseas, fueling a brain drain that further weakens the country's future. Even professionals, doctors, engineers, teachers, are stretched to breaking point. A doctor's salary that once ensured comfort now barely pays the rent. Many quietly moonlight in second jobs or migrate abroad where their skills are better valued. Yet amid the despair, resilience persists. Community networks have grown stronger. Neighbors share food, families pool resources, and religious charities step in to provide essentials. Turks have endured military coups, earthquakes, and wars, and many draw on that history of endurance as they face today's economic storm. Still, survival is not prosperity. For millions, the crisis has stripped away dignity, security, and the dream of upward mobility. Instead, life has become a relentless struggle against a collapsing currency and an unforgiving market. Erdogan's gamble. Can he still save Turkey? For 2 decades, Recep Tayyip Erdogan has styled himself as Turkey's strongman, the leader who rebuilt a nation, challenged the West, and gave a voice to the forgotten poor. But today, his greatest gamble may determine not just his political survival, but the fate of the Turkish Republic itself. Erdogan refuses to bow to orthodox economics. While most governments fight inflation by raising interest rates, he insists on cutting them, calling high rates the mother of all evil. To him, low interest rates fuel growth, protect small businesses, and keep credit cheap for the people who once made him a hero. But this gamble has a cost. Investors flee, savings vanish, and the lira sinks further. Erdogan argues that patience will pay off, that a new economic model will eventually create jobs and exports. His critics, however, call it delusion, an obsession that is bleeding Turkey dry. Politically, Erdogan doubles down. State media praises his vision. Rallies fill with loyal supporters who see him not just as a president, but as the embodiment of Turkish pride. To them, the West's criticism is proof that Erdogan is on the right path. Yet behind the theatrics, the numbers are unforgiving. Turkey's foreign reserves are running thin, inflation remains crushing, debt piles up, and with elections looming, Erdogan faces a stark reality. If his gamble fails, he may take the entire economy down with him. Erdogan has always thrived in crisis, turning setbacks into opportunities. But this time, the storm is of his own making. The question is no longer whether he can outmaneuver his opponents, but whether he can outmaneuver the very laws of economics. The fate of a nation. Once, Turkey was a rising star, a bridge between East and West, a model for how a Muslim-majority nation could be modern, democratic, and prosperous. Today, that promise hangs by a thread. The lira is broken, inflation has shredded savings, families struggle to survive, investors look elsewhere, and the world watches in disbelief as one of the 21st century's great economic success stories collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. For some, Erdogan is still the visionary who gave Turkey its highways, airports, and global ambition. For others, he is the architect of ruin, a leader who traded sound economics for pride and control. The truth is that Turkey's fate is no longer just about numbers, charts or interest rates. It is about trust. Trust in leaders, trust in institutions, trust in the very future of the republic. History will judge whether Erdogan's gamble was genius or folly. But one fact is undeniable. The story of Turkey's Lira is not just an economic crisis. It is a story about power, pride, and the fragile foundations of modern nations. And as Turkey stares into the abyss, the world is left to wonder, can a nation built on dreams rise again? Or will those dreams be lost to the dust of history? So, what can you do about this? First, share this video. Most people don't realize how one man's gamble wiped out nearly an entire nation's savings. Second, subscribe, because we're going to keep exposing the hidden economic stories that shape our world. And third, drop a comment. Do you think Erdogan's policies were bold resistance to Western pressure, or reckless decisions that doomed Turkey's future? Next week, Nigeria's oil curse. Why Africa's richest country can't feed itself.